Well, good afternoon, good morning, depending upon where you are tuning in from. My name is W.E. De Cruz, and welcome to Beyond Borders, Navigating Africa's Export Landscape, Session 3 of 4 web series. In this session, we'll be speaking specifically with an organization that represents much of what's possible in West Africa, but also available to you across the continent. I am your moderator. I have spent my last decade on the continent, exporting my tech services across the continent, helping to promote the adoption of digitalization to drive economic development. And so this conversation is extremely exciting to me. And I'm really looking forward to having it with our guest, Scott Blackland. Scott is representing Cybastian today. He is the Senior Vice President of Cybastian and a special advisor to Cybastian's CEO, Dr. Thierry Wanji. Scott Blackland serves as the Senior Advisor to Cybastian Institute of Technology, an American tech company delivering world-class digital and cybersecurity solutions in Africa, where he provides high-level strategic guidance to the company's leadership on engagement with U.S. government agencies, multilateral development banks, and global financial institutions. As senior advisor, Mr. Blackland leads efforts to cultivate relationships and strengthen partnerships with private sector partners, including Cisco and Google, among others. Scott Blackland is a friend of NADAC and DEC and a friend of mine because we work together closely on DEC to lead a lot of these U.S. Africa initiatives and panels and sessions over the years. And so I'm very excited to continue our work and conversation today on this webinar. Scott. Now, before we get into the webinar, I like to get everyone's energy going. I like to level set and make sure that we are all on the same page and get an idea on your knowing of Africa. And so everyone open up your chat. We're going to open up your chat. This is not going to be too rocket science, hopefully, for you, but I want to get a feel for what you know about Africa. Now, if you didn't know, African countries have slogans, right? Slogans that pretty much represent the culture and the being of the African nation. And so I'm curious to know, does anybody know what country is considered land of 1,000 hills? Just write it in the chat. Land of 1,000 hills. What African nation is considered the land of 1,000 hills? Land of 1,000 hills. Burkina Faso, no. Drakensberg, no. Maybe you're saying no. Johannesburg, no. It's Rwanda, Chrissy. Good job. Chrissy got it for us. It's Rwanda. All right, let's get in a little deeper now. This country or this nation is considered the giant of Africa. The giant of Africa. What country do you think we're talking about? The giant. And we're going to be going all over Africa, not just West Africa. I'm going to be giving you slogans across the continent. So this country is called the giant of Africa. The giant of Africa. What country can it be? Egypt? No, Antonio. Egypt is actually the gift of the Nile. That's the slogan for Egypt, the gift of the Nile. Yep, Shanta, Nigeria. Good one. Yes, 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 yes. All right, I'll give you two more because we're like, let's see now. This should give itself away, but the Horn of Africa. The Horn of Africa. What nation, African nation, is considered the Horn of Africa? It should give itself away. No, not Ethiopia. Not Ethiopia. The Horn of Africa. It's not far from Ethiopia. Somalia. Yes, Chrissy. Chrissy's 2 for 2. Good job. Yes, Antonia. Yes, and yes. 2 for 2, Chrissy. I think you're winning right now. Now, which country is considered, I thought this was quite interesting. I didn't know this myself, but there's a country considered, it's called, where is it? It's the um the eyes of Africa. I didn't know this was the eyes of Africa, but now when I think about it, I think I know why. This country is considered the eyes of Africa. The eyes of Africa. Which country? The eyes of Africa. I think I know why. What country? The Eyes of Africa. Any guess? Don't worry, I'm not really marking you right or wrong. The Eyes of Africa. What country? And it tells you, it goes to show how vast and wide Africa is in terms of its nations and what it represents and the possibilities for us exporters to engage. It's not Mauritius. Nope, not that. No, no, no. Eyes of Africa, but it does start with the M. I'll give you that. It does start with the M. I'll give you that. So that should hopefully, yes, Mali, the Eyes of Africa, Mali, yeah. And I think because of Timbuktu, there's supposed to be a lot of literature of like the origins that traveled from like Ethiopia and Egypt to Mali. I'm thinking something along those lines, but who knows? It's called The Eyes of Africa. I'd have to do more research. I don't know why, but I'm just guessing off of just knowledge around Timbuktu and a lot of the history and the pilgrimage and things of the maybe the eyes in terms of like it's knowing about the history of the continent. Yes, the huge library is located. Yeah, that's exactly, Chrissy. Is exactly why I'm thinking the Eyes of Africa because of all of the knowledge that it's there. So nonetheless, thank you so much for participating. I love to share. There's so many slogans. When I first came across slogans, I was in Malawi. I didn't know Malawi is considered the I believe it's the warm heart of Africa. That's the first time I got into a country and someone said, you know, we're called the warm heart of Africa. I was like, no, I didn't know that. And then I learned soon that a lot of the countries have these slogans and these sayings. And so I got really interested in them. But um, as we digress, let's get right into it. Scott Blackland, thank you so much for joining us today on behalf of Sebastian and the work that you're doing across the continent and just showing us how possible it is to expand our impact to export across the continent. So let's talk about the origins. Let's start with the origins, right? Let's talk about from Africa to USA and back, expanding our services across the continent. Can you tell us Sebastian's origin story, like its mission in Africa?
Well, yes, and thank you. And first of all, greetings to my friends and colleagues from the district export councils around the United States. It's a real joy to participate again. And actually, uh, I met with the Sebastian founders back 5 years ago when there were just two of them, and they came into the USIAC in Arlington with my colleague, Bill Fanjoy, who was also a DEC member, and we were scratching our heads and how do we help these people who had an idea around cybersecurity in, of all places, Burkina Faso? So we began to look at the art of the possible, and I have to admit, the Sebastian vision and path forward has intrigued me and consumed me ever since. I am not from Africa, but the two founders of Sebastian are indeed diaspora Americans, originally from Cameroon. Cameroon is an unusual country in as much as you find English and French spoken in different parts of Cameroon, and these U.S. citizens are part of that marvelous bridge that has been built up between diaspora, between Africa and the United States. And it was started by Dr. Thierry Wangy, who sends his regrets. He was supposed to be here instead of me, and I'm sure he would have a much more colorful presentation. But Dr. Wangy went to school in Canada and then uh, began working in the United States, became a U.S. citizen, served in the U.S. Navy, and became a specialist in cybersecurity. Also taught cybersecurity at several U.S. universities, but had this feeling that something was calling him back, and he was very, very sensitive to the need of all African countries to accelerate their digital transformation, which was right up his alley. So he took his particular background and has created Sebastian with the idea of creating independent and protected digital platforms throughout Africa. And that's what we started with in 2019. We started with two people, with those two gentlemen. It was I was an advisor at the time, but now I'm fully a part of that world. And it is now a company of 15 people here in the US and 70 plus in our different operating units in Africa. We have offices in Cote d'Ivoire, in Abidjan, and also in Burkina Faso, which in Ouagadougou. And we have operations, ongoing operations and digitization programs in about 10 or 12 countries throughout West Africa with the intention of expanding. So that's kind of like the beginning of where we are. I'll come back to this quite a bit. My background has always been in emerging markets, and I've always been attracted to emerging markets because it's not rules based all the time. It's human, and I've learned. My ignorance is still vast about Africa, but I've learned that the human element is precisely what drives everything. And you have that in any emerging market, but particularly so in Africa. And I've personally found that to be uplifting and exciting, but it's also the way to get things done. So that's part of the reason why Dr. Wanji is not there today. The Minister of ICT of Cote d'Ivoire called him in and said, we've got several $100 million contract that we want to talk about. Can somebody else speak to the NADEC? So here I am. But that's the origin. That's what brings us up to today. And we're very happy and grateful that we're in this place and I'm working in such a wonderful environment as the unfolding story of Africa.
I love that, Scott. I mean, one, just the importance of relatability and getting related. When we talk about the strategies as it pertains to exporting our services and going into new territory, I think one of the key things is that human relationship and getting related. So thank you for touching on that. And you mentioned a price point there that sounded really exciting. So let's get into why should U.S. exporters pay a closer attention to West Africa as a key market and the contract possibilities to expand business, make impact, and really export services. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
This is where my relative newness. I've been now focusing on Africa for 5 years. It opens up some very surprising things. When I've gotten to know Africans, one of the first things they always said, "Well, where are the Americans?" Well, they're around, but they haven't always been in Africa. There has been a natural affinity, or at least it seems to me, between Africans of any country I've met and America, because again, we are a nation of immigrants and we have that bridge built from virtually every African country has its own bridge back here. But they'd love to feel the love. It's kind of like sometimes we're Africa might be the young boy and America is the pretty older girl, and they just want to get her attention, and she kind of looks and winks every now and then, but isn't serious. But the hunger for the American connection is there, and I cannot say enough about the services of the diaspora community in opening these doors. Because guess what? Russia doesn't have a diaspora community. China does not have a diaspora community. The United States does, and it's in our roots, and it's in that diaspora applies to all of the countries around the world, since we're a nation of immigrants, but it's particularly strong in Africa. In West Africa, where we're operating, I remember being in a corporate position many times where you look and you stack rank your markets, and you look at French West Africa or Francophone Africa and say, oh, no, the French have that one. Well, that is absolutely not true. The French influence has been a great boon in many ways to Francophone Africa, but the French influence has been very much on the retreat over the last decade or so, and there is a vacuum that has been very much attracted has very much attracted Chinese participation. But we've had our friends in Africa have had the blandishments and the temptations and all the good things, quote unquote, good things that China offers, but they've also now had enough time to see that it isn't everything. Yes, they offer predatory financing. But in our space, they sure don't offer cybersecurity. We like to see that Chinese cybersecurity is an oxymoron. It is a contradiction in terms, and they don't train the population. They're catching up, but we are committed to embracing the demographic talent that is hungry for a future, and laying down of ICT, information communication technologies. That's the fundamental garden space for everything that grows out of it. Yes, the Chinese did take what I call digital 1.0 15, 20 years ago, where it was the equivalent of dial-up. But right now it's digital 2.0 or beyond. And this is where the networks control critical infrastructure, and they control also the government communications. So this is where the Chinese embrace, shall we say, is problematic. Whereas the American embrace, and it's not just Sebastian, the American embrace is to encourage independent and protected networks. And every time we put in a new network, we put a needle in the brain of the ICT part of the China Belt and Road Initiative. So there is a hunger for American companies, particularly in infrastructure areas. And in the areas of infrastructure, I would argue that after electric power, ICT is the most fundamental thing because it touches on all aspects of infrastructure.
No, I think you touched on a lot of great points, Scott. And as you were speaking about when you said the question, like Africans are asking, where's Americans? I remember being born in the US, but raised in Ghana, where my family is from. I do remember growing up and seeing a lot of Asians, a lot more Asians than I could recognize Africans for sure. And I always thought it was quite interesting that we would even go into the depth of the village. Like, so we are from mainly the city area, but we would go into the village and there'd be Asians there too. And so I'd always wonder why that was. And, growing up now in the US and trying to understand some of the dynamics, yeah, I do think there is, we'd be remiss not to engage faster, sooner, and deeper with the continent because we are looking for, a lot of Africans are looking for that partnership. And so we're so excited to hear that from your perspective, being on the ground and representing the diaspora community. So let's get in a little deeper. What are some of the pathways for US companies to enter into the market? We know that there's a desire from the African side to engage with Americans. What are some of the pathways, the actionable steps that US exporters continue to take? Is it region specific, or is it just generally for anyone interested in entering into the market?
Well, there are 54 countries in Africa, and each one has its own challenges and opportunities. So I don't like to say that one thing applies to everything. But having said that, I will say that one thing is true in that almost all of them are emerging countries, and in those countries, the personalized connection is very, very important. And I wanted to get back to the point that I mentioned about the diaspora earlier, is that we don't always offer the best financial terms. The Chinese are able to offer very predatory financing, get you hooked in the front end, and then own you later. But what the Americans, and again through that diaspora community, what they can do is, I like to say, they make a spiritual investment. And our diaspora companies make that spiritual investment into that. And the Chinese don't do that. The Russians don't do it. And many don't do it. We're in that position to do it. And the successful firms are those that create those types of bonds. It does not have to be through diaspora hands. I know some very, very good businesses that are run by others than diaspora Americans. But everyone has one thing in common. They spend a lot of time in Africa. Now, it's not just because these processes are complicated and contradictory and they need to be handheld, but it is the bonds that are built. And when you have those bonds, you can judge your markets. You can begin to make forecasts. If what trust leads to is the ability to see the future. In a business sense, that's your forecasting. It's judging where do you put your precious resources, and that's one thing. Another area is and I'm speaking from an infrastructure perspective here. There are specialized consumer and other types of exchanges that may not fall under this. But if we are talking about investment and export of American know-how in infrastructure, then it's very wise to, once you've established that intimacy, come up with a larger strategic partner. This has been a great advantage that Sebastian has had. We have such customer intimacy in the markets where we operate that we then attract companies such as a Cisco Systems, a Hewlett Packard, a Starlink, a Google. We work for all of them. And why do they want to talk to us? Because they realize that we're a route to market that they cannot touch. In a previous life, I used to work, I was a VP at Cisco Systems, and we used to beat our chests and say, "Hey, we do almost $1 billion a year in Africa." And then people would say, "Well, which countries?" And well, four maybe. Guess what? There are 54 countries, and if you're not touching them, somebody else will, and we know who they are. So it is a combination of creating the intimacy, creating that human element, and bringing in the strategic partners, such as it is. And then we can't forget the very valuable assistance of our U.S. government friends, folks in the U.S. Commercial Service. They are still active in the continent, and the U.S. embassies have also been very helpful in extending the message and creating and accelerating the conversation through the contacts that they have. So that's it does require an affinity and an investment in the human side, but once you begin to see that, then you begin to see where you want to place your next bets, and it's a gift that gives every day. You get headaches every day, but it is a very rich human experience that you then, once you do that, you draw the attention of bigger, more strategic partners, and then they in turn can bring the resources that they have to bear, but they don't have the touch in the market. And it comes down to touch. It's always touch.
I love that. So touch being the competitive advantage in the marketplace. Now you mentioned headaches, and we know that it's just the highs and lows of business. We understand that there's valleys on mountaintops. So let's talk a little bit about the challenges for U.S. exporters when entering into the West African market. What do those headaches look like? Can you give us just kind of visually give us an understanding of what that looks like, but also what would be then the strategy to navigate those type of headaches?
I will come back to the final answer to that question. Again, it is the intimacy that enables you to overcome the inevitable obstacles. I would be less than candid if I did not say that there weren't people in these countries that want to take a little bit for themselves in the midst of a process. And if you think in terms of trade, you're exporting goods, and in that there's paper or digital information and money, and the movement of the goods and the movement of the information and the movement of the money all has specific steps. And it is still quite a challenge to get uh, money out of Africa. And this is where you need to have an outreach. Again, if you're in the infrastructure world, look at how your financing works so that you understand that, and then be ready for extra steps. If we get paid by, we're selling to the government of Cote d'Ivoire, we get paid theoretically by the Ministry of Finance, but then they've got to give a guarantee to a bank, and the bank transfers the money to a correspondent bank. There are extra steps in there that do not do not flow from an organization chart, and you've got a time cost, and these are solvable. But and then also in those countries, in the francophone countries, a lot of them have French or France derived habits. There are extra steps that they've inherited, and then they've invented some of their own. So there are extra steps. Some of them allow people uh, to dip in to the flow of money un, in an unauthorized way, but mostly it's just a question of following a procedure. And this is where, if you build up your relationships on one side of the equation and they want to have things happen, and you all of a sudden you've got a problem at customs and so forth, then you've got to use those relationships to encourage their friends to do other things that help things move forward. So it's always leveraging your human capital in these countries to solve the inevitable problems that will come up that you cannot foresee. That doesn't mean you don't do your account planning, your market planning, and everything else, but just realize that there will be surprises and that you're going to need to leverage your on-ground relationships to overcome them.
I love the human capital. I think human capital, mobilizing human capital is so key in anything that you do in life. I truly believe you must engage and mobilize people. Let's talk a little bit about the human capital on the Africa side. Can you give us an understanding as to who are some of the people within the African infrastructure or structure? We're looking at government, or maybe looking at public or private, that we should be looking to develop relationships with as part of this strategy around human capital?
It's a great question. What jumps to mind when you throw that out to me is look for the universities.
Mhm.
Look for the university connections. Uh, yeah, this wasn't Africa, but when I was at Cisco, I went in. I was selling to King Khalid University in Saudi Arabia, and I was all nervous because I didn't understand if I might offend them by doing something my way, and certainly the dean of the school came in and he was wearing the beautiful flowing robes that the Saudis sport, and I was getting myself ready for a very informal and process where I would inevitably screw up in some way. And the guy comes in and he goes, "Hey, I'm a Missouri Tiger. Where'd you go to school?" And so that was 15 or 20 years ago, and I learned something very valuable. Look for the ties of the American university. It's one of the gems that we have is when you're hiring people, the message going out, it Americanizes or at least gets them to understand how the Americans do business. They are great partners. So anytime that uh, you see young professionals, if they've had any U.S. university experience, that's a way to go. And then we, as Sebastian, we work very closely with George Mason University, one of Virginia's greatest universities, and I think they will tell you they're the largest university in Virginia. But they are rich, they are diverse, and they are looking out. And we're opening up a campus in Abidjan in the near future, and it gives us access to a lot of programs that are focused on young people. And I want to come back to another thing about young people. I promise not to generalize about Africa, but I'm going to right here. Every African country has got this huge youth demographic bump. It can either be a promise or a threat or some combination thereof, but they're looking for a future. And that's why we like to focus on ICT. These young people are already plugged in to the extent that their local infrastructure allows, but they see more and they want more. So working with universities, leaning into your training, that's so important. Bringing folks here. You're going to do a lot of you're going to do a lot of virtual training, but bringing them to the United States is a good thing. We trained the entire cadre of Burkina Faso cybersecurity. Cybersecurity agency in at North Carolina State, and we were very pleased about that. And that really worked right there in the middle of Research Triangle Park, and it was a very rich experience. And there's one other thing on that human side it's not just bringing technology over there. It's what I like to say, it's the transfer of organizational technology. What Dr. Walji and the Sebastian team recognized early on was this, it's if we're going to create protected networks, you need cybersecurity agencies. These countries did not have cybersecurity agencies. We built one in Burkina Faso. Well, guess what? Niger noticed that, Benin noticed that, Cote d'Ivoire noticed that, and now we're building in different forms these uh, these cybersecurity agencies there. And then you've got another area of collaboration between the United States and these countries because it's that transfer of organizational technology which is every bit as important as the technical transfers that are embodied in our technology.
Love that. Thank you for sharing your the lived experience of Sebastian. As we're getting ready to open up questions for the audience and talk generally about just West Africa and how to approach the strategies for West Africa. Um, let's talk about the future of Africa. Why must US engage now? And even if you want to speak particularly to West Africa and what makes West Africa such a palatable place to start as it pertains to exporting.
Well, the future of Africa, it's the fastest growing part of the world. I think that the population, and people throw around wild numbers, but I think Africa's population is going to hit 2.5 billion by 2050, and and the largest working population in the world by 2040. Again, the the youth element you see when we look out 2030, 2040, 2050. So that is that in and of itself uh, argues for the centrality of Africa. Then the pure upside of the country. What we've seen in many instances, particularly in the ICT space, and this comes almost up from the soil, what people have done with mobile phones, mobile banking, bridging the rural-urban gap by figuring out what's available in terms of seeds or other conditions. We are learning from the applications that these growing populations have. One of the most exciting things about Sebastian is we're laying down the digital platform and we're seeing where all of these e-services, whether it's land management systems or cybersecurity insurance, and that's just a few, just looking from our own experience, all of those e-enabled businesses can grow in these countries. And again, each one creates jobs. Each one becomes a magnet for foreign direct investment. So it's exciting, and we learn things because we have legacy systems here in the United States that are not there in many of these countries, and so we see applications brought to us all the time. Uh, the startup community in Africa is extremely dynamic, and it's one that unfortunately has seen some cuts in the last 2 months where we were actually creating these types of ecosystems, but there will be those ecosystems will continue. So the future of the population, the technology that's there, the ongoing desire for the American involvement. Let's not even talk about the minerals and all that stuff. That stuff comes. We don't want to be there with our hand in their pocket. That's what the Chinese do. That's what the Russians do. Let's reach in and touch the heart and not the pocket.
Heart and not the pocket. Love that strategy. Now, we understand that there are a number of different companies that are on the call today. Not everyone's in ICT. Just generally speaking, for West Africa as a region, why should exporters potentially look at West Africa as a region coming from the US?
One thing that jumps out to me is if I'm thinking from expanding my business internationally, I've got to know that I can scale to some extent. If I do it in one country, can I scale this with relative ease? And so there's a regionalization dynamic, which is You'll see it in other parts of Africa. I think you see it in Southeast Africa, around Kenya and so forth. But we're really seeing it quite a bit in Francophone Africa. And the things that we've brought into one country, they want it in their country. They know what's going on there. So you're able to scale from a relatively small market into a regional footprint. So that is that's an element as well. And there are regional development banks that we work with. There's always the African Development Bank, of course, but the West Africa Development Bank is investing in infrastructure projects up to 30%. So this is any type of infrastructure. So this is not uh, a complete greenfield opportunity. There are resources in place, and um, so. And I mentioned earlier the vacating of the area by the French, and so the doors are very much open to American companies. They're very patient with people who don't speak perfect French, and but English is there are English speaking countries in West Africa, of course. Akua, your home country of Ghana and Nigeria and others, but it's 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 very congenial to American enterprise. There's a lot of ports. We're working with the subsea cables that are off the coast of West Africa, and we're working with Google, working with Starlink to provide connectivity nodes. And every connectivity node, it's kind of like the 19th century railroads going out to the western part of what was the United States. Those that were near the connectivity or the railroad, they flourished. And those that didn't embrace that did not. Now, connectivity is much more widespread than is a railroad. So this is another area. But where you see connectivity, you see the rollout of other forms of infrastructure, whether it's road building, education, healthcare, water development. The needs are vast, and the countries need an integrated strategy for them, and that's where again the embrace and the transfer of understanding is very very pronounced.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing that. We have a question. I believe Sai, if I'm saying that correctly. They are a AI-based SaaS products and services. They are located in New Jersey. They want to know, how do they get access into the markets in West Africa? They already have partners in South Africa. What would be a next best step for them?
One of the things, a low cost, uh, relatively low cost thing is to engage the U.S. commercial service. They have a Gold Key program, which it can focus on different things. They also have a single company promotion. If you get to that point where they can, again, you can whittle down your list, and that's the real challenge of Africa. Where do you begin? Where do you begin? Look where some resources are that can help you define your potential market and put timelines on your investment so that you know that, okay, I'm investing this now, and in 18 months, I'm going to be having A, B, and C, and so forth. This is where the US government resources can be very helpful. Unfortunately, there's not enough commercial service officers in these countries, but I would start with them because usually the US government's made good decisions about where they place their commercial offices, and that's a great way to start. Um, and those things are sticky too. When you look at that, the ecosystem is there. Another thing to look at is to reach out to the American Chambers of Commerce. Almost all the countries have a local AmCham. They will, and you look at the members, and you could see what is there, what is not, what is the mix. So finding out what is the nature of the demand for your product or service can be deduced from looking at the entire American and European presence in those countries. So those are a few tips. And if you dig more deeply into that, you'll pretty soon get an idea of what your top 3, 4, 5 markets might be. And then it's time to dive in. Don't be shy.
Absolutely. And what I want to add to that, and then another suggestion that we have, if you're not aware of the STEP program, the State Trade
Right.
Expansion Program, which, I mean, every state is different in terms of the allotment of money that is available to the US exporters. I know here in Michigan, we get up to 75% reimbursed on $15,000 a year, but you can use that to support you in funding some of these opportunities like the Gold Key. What's strategic about Gold Key, what I love is the Gold Key provides the opportunity for you to actually create an event in said country and invite stakeholders, your prospective clients, to come to an event that is supported by the U.S. Embassy, and letters are written on like with the U.S. Embassy emblem, which then gives a level of legitimacy for you in said country. But there are also a ton of we call them like consortium-led trips. I know Sebastian also leads consortiums of companies from the US into these countries to do some initial kind of discovery work. And so joining trade missions are also great ways. I've been on a few trade missions that have allowed us to engage very specific, strategically and intentional meetings with real probable like clients. So those are all initial steps that you can take. But to the point of relatability, Scott, I think it's also, you know, if you don't already have an ecosystem of West, okay, well, you're in New Jersey. I'm from Jersey, okay? I used to live in Princeton, to Seton Hall University. So I'm familiar with Jersey, very familiar. We have a huge West African community in New Jersey. And so sometimes it's also immersing yourself with the diaspora in Jersey, a lot of business owners there who have relationships on the ground. And then you use like the US Commercial Service Office and some of the other partners to vet any potential leads that you may have from those type of relationships. So anyway, any questions regarding Jersey and West Africans, let me know. I was born and raised.
No, I
Uh,
would I would only reinforce that this my home state of Virginia led a trade mission to Senegal and Cote d'Ivoire back in May of last year, and it was enormously successful. And it was somewhat subsidized, I think, by step funds and other state funds, and so there still is the right states with the right combination, and you deck people know where your state stands. I'm sure that can be a real boon to you.
Yeah, no, great question. I think those are always my initial steps when I'm looking to enter into another country that I'm not familiar with. I kind of look at it from multiple angles, and then like you said, you start to sift out what is the best and probable lead forward. So love that. Thank you for that question. I'm looking at the Q&A to see if we have any other questions. Yeah, so how can Sebastian help us? If there's a link or if there's an email regarding the consortiums that Sebastian leads, I know Sai, who just asked the question concerning West Africa, is interested. So if Antonio, if there's a link or where they should reach out, let us know so that we can make that connection, help make that connection. Great question.
Thank
Which,
you. We also have a very capable communications team led up by Shanta John, who is on this call as well. So we welcome any questions about the markets that we operate in, and if we can't help you, we'll do our best to make recommendations. Our door is absolutely open.
yeah, wonderful. Wonderful. I'm just going through the chat to see if there are any other questions that are here. I know David had a few questions that I saw earlier. I'm just looking to see, he asked specifically about what country would be a good country to set up imports, like which country maybe has favorable terms in terms of import duty and free trade, like Morocco. Any idea what countries in West Africa?
That requires I'm not in a position to give you a product by product breakdown and how that would compare from Benin to Morocco to Togo and so forth. That's readily knowable, Uh, in many cases you want to understand what the entire life cycle of an export is, as well as any particular tariff barriers or tariff incentives that may exist there. I wish I could be more informative about that. It has not been a burden for us in terms of the infrastructure connected with independent and protected ICT networks.
Absolutely. But the information is readily available to you as, as you engage U.S.
It,
Commercial Service
it,
Office on the ground.
in fact, thank you for reminding me. Your commercial service officers would probably have in each country, and if they don't have a commercial service officer, you can go to an econ officer for that information. And in most cases, they're pretty responsive.
They are, yes, we know we're going through some transitions right now, but there are many different touch points that you can still engage. If you're unable to connect with the U.S. Commercial Service Office, reach out to a District Export Council member or a DEC, and we'll be more than happy to help you navigate those resources as well. In terms of resources, I'd be remiss not to mention or bring up that we have our last webinar to continue this conversation on April 10th. And so we want to encourage you to register to that too. It's an extension of this conversation here. Scott will be speaking about, I believe we're going to East Africa next, but just generally about how to navigate the terrain, how to engage folks on the ground, how to build that relatability, mobilize the human capital, engage with resources and the current structures and pathways as it pertains to U.S.-Africa trade relations. And so we want to encourage you, if you look in the chat, you'll see the link there for session 4. We want to encourage you. We'll have a few speakers who represent East Africa who are on the ground. Again, similar to Scott and Sebastian, if you're interested in West Africa, you want to engage a company that's already on the ground, vetted by the U.S. government, doing the work, established as kind of an entry point to engage the region. And so we'll definitely have amazing speakers for the next session. I'm just going through to see if there are any other questions, Scott. Maybe I'll give you a few minutes to leave any parting words or strategies or summarize, just summarize Sebastian's strategy and just offer up strategy for those who are on the call, just as a summary as we get ready to wrap up this session.
Well, we at Sebastian are dedicated to the digital transformation of Africa. We're starting in Francophone Africa. We're already operating in non-Francophone Africa. We're in Angola. Our CEO went with President Biden there, and we're looking at subsea cable projects there. So that I would encourage people from our perspective, where I could say a little bit of something without being completely ignorant, is look at what grows out of a growing ICT infrastructure, because all sorts of businesses do that, and see where that can take you in your business. And I can only stress again, it is a human enterprise full of the highs and lows of any human enterprise, but it is a deeply human experience. There's one other thing that you can get a lot of information and recommendations by doing your homework here. There are dedicated organizations to Africa, such as the Corporate Council in Africa, an excellent organization that's purely business oriented. There's the African Business Center of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. So there's that. And again, the U.S. Commercial Service. There's a lot that is American businesses we can avail ourselves of. See what's been done in your own individual state. You will be surprised at the engagements that you will find. Look for other people that have done some work in Africa. Maybe they'd have the conversation with you. Oh boy, I've been working in Kenya or Botswana, and I've been looking for this type of company. Look for those companies that are doing business in Africa. So state, federal, your business councils, these are low cost, not tremendously time consuming ways to really position yourself to where you can begin to make that jump into the market.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Scott Blackland, on behalf of Sebastian and Dr. Terry and the entire team. On behalf of NADAC and the board and the team, we want to thank each and every one of you for registering and joining us for our third webinar where we focus primarily on West Africa and just a prime example of a U.S. business that has been able to expand and grow across the continent based in West Africa. We want to extend the opportunity again for you to join us for our last and final session, session 4 on April 10th. We'll be speaking about East Africa. We'll have representation from East Africa companies on the ground that are doing great work, that have expanded across the continent, just to show you that it is possible, that exporting across the continent, engaging your African partners across the Atlantic is a very possible opportunity for your company. And there are so many resources that are available at your fingertips. And so we want to make sure that if you still have any questions that have not been answered, our emails are on the screen right now. Feel free to reach out to any one of us and we'll direct you on the pathway in which you should go. I think that will wrap up session 3 for us. Scott, thank you so much for joining us again today. And for all those who joined us, thank you and wishing you a blessed day, a blessed week.
And thank you. And I want the decks to continue to do the great work. It is God's work you're doing, so go forward.
Thank you.